And welcome to another edition of Murphy's Hockey Law. Jimmy Murphy here, your host, with my producer Blake Thorne, and welcoming on NHL connoisseur Pete Blackburn joining us right now. Pete, how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. And it was good to see you over at Warrior Arena. What was that, last week, I think?
Yeah, last Wednesday or something.
Yeah, the days are already blending
I
into
know.
one, man. And once the season gets going, it's just like one long day for 6 months.
It is funny how camp starts and it seems like camp crawls for the first week or so, and then all of a
It's war.
sudden the rest of the camp just completely blends
Yeah.
together, and then all of a sudden the season's here.
It's funny. I was actually a couple of the players were saying that the other day. I think who was I talking to? Lucic maybe was talking about that, and then a lot of them have brought up the point too, Pete, that there's a more condensed schedule now, preseason wise, less games. So you kind of just thrown right into it. But it's got its pros and cons. But it's funny actually. You know what? Before we get going on our NHL predictions here, I brought this up. I don't know who brought it up to me. Like I might have just been talking with some guy up at Jocko's here in Waltham, and we were talking about joint practices in the NFL. And so I brought it up to Montgomery and Lucic. Montgomery loved the idea, and he had this interesting story where he said, "Yeah, it's like everything's so quick right now, so I don't know if we could do it, but back in the old setup we had, I think it would have worked." And he said, "It's funny you bring that up, Murph, because when I was with Dallas, we were playing Florida at the time, and Quinville was a coach, and he said in the first intermission, he said, 'Hey, do you mind, regardless of what the score is, do you mind if I pull our goalie? Because I want to practice that. I want to get our methods out that so when we're in that situation, we're ready for it come the regular season." And he's like, "That's a whack question, but I kind of like it. Yeah, go for it. And so it was interesting. And then Lucci's like, "No, no, 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 man." He's like, "We'll all get hurt because we'll kill each other." So what's your take on that? You think it would
I mean,
work?
I think it would be fascinating from a fan perspective.
Yeah.
I could understand why the players wouldn't want it, and like Lucic says, you don't necessarily want to mix it up. And
Mhm.
we see what happens in those inter squad scrimmages or the joint practices in the
Yeah.
NFL. There's always a fight when they have
Yeah.
those. So it would be fascinating. I think the most fascinating part of it would be, you get the full squads and you put them out on the ice together. How does that impact the way that the front office and sort of the scouting department looks at the guys on the other side? Because you get a
Oh,
great look at some of the fringe
yeah.
roster players, or even in the system, and you get really high on a lot of those guys in camp.
Yeah.
So if you open that up to other
Scouting.
GMs, other
Yep.
scouting departments, the impact that might have off somebody's good camp or a couple great practices could move the needle for a different team.
Yeah, and you know what? I think PTOs would love it, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
for
guys
sure.
on
Yeah.
PTOs because they're getting the direct scouting there. Like you're right, from guys like other teams would be able to see that. And hey, okay, if he's not going to make your team, maybe we'll take him. So it'll be interesting. We'll see what happens. But the NHL's got bigger things on their mind. Speaking of the salary cap, they say yesterday it's going to go up. We've heard this before, Pete. And they heard it a lot, and teams actually based it around, went around the projections they gave us originally, and then it stayed stale. How much do you think teams put stock in what Gary Bettman said yesterday at the Board of Governors?
I feel like you can't put too much stock into it, because I feel like it's
Yeah,
just like a trigger reflex for Gary Bettman at this point, where if he gets behind a microphone, he immediately just says, "Cap's going up next year."
yeah,
He always says it, and we always get up for it. And I know that there's been a reason for it not rising too much over the past couple of years, because they still have to pay back the COVID dues and things
that's
like
right.
that. So hopefully we're nearing the end of that sort of discourse where the cap will just go up and we don't have to talk about it too much. But
Yeah,
obviously it has stalled and it's changed plans, and the Bruins know that as well as anybody, where if you're building the team to win right now and the cap doesn't go up, you can kind of screw yourself a little bit.
yeah, and let's get into them right now. And both of us have covered that team for a while. Interesting camp for this Bruins team. I mean, we knew going in there was going to be a lot of open slots. So some jobs were up in the bottom six forward group and then the bottom pairing of the defense. What's been your take so far? I mean, obviously everybody's talking about Matthew Poitras. and John Beecher's starting to get a lot of love, and Mason Lowry. But what's been your take on some of the veterans they brought in, like a Boquist or say a Morgan Geeky?
I mean, I'm a huge Morgan Geeky guy. I loved when they signed him. I thought that it was a little surprising that Seattle didn't retain him. I think that
Mhm.
he's just a really good bottom six player. Like he's not gonna blow you away, but I think he does a lot of things right. He has that skill that you want to see in a bottom six guy, while also, you know, good defensively. I really like him, and I think that he's a guy that will fit in with this Bruins team, and I think that he's going to surprise some people with the impact that he has. Boquist, haven't been fully impressed by him. I think that he's a player, but it's one of those situations where you can only go off of what you see, and I don't think that he's had the best camp and hasn't really impressed too much. So, Geeky and Patra, I think for me are like the two guys that I'm excited about based
Yeah.
off of what I've seen.
Yeah, I'm with you on Boquist. I mean, he kind of he flies. I mean, no one's denying the
Mhm.
speed this kid has, right? But he kind of reminds me. I forget the character's name in the old Mighty Ducks, where the one that would just fly, but he couldn't stop.
Yeah,
And he would
right.
just go right by the
Yeah.
net.
Is it Kenny Wu?
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah, yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
There we go. Yeah, he's Kenny Wu. So if he could somehow channel that speed and make it a little more useful, he might be in business there. But look, I was really impressed as camp went on. Obviously Poitras, but Beecher has really impressed me as well. I didn't realize how good he's been at the face-off dot, and that's been
Mhm.
showing as the camp's gone on. And they need that. I mean, look, they need to do it by committee when it comes to replacing what they had in Patrice Bergeron at the dot, because nobody can ever be that good.
Right.
But I do think they have some candidates that can step up, and I think he's one of them. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, if I was looking at it right now in terms of guys that aren't going to make the roster, and we're speaking right now before they play their final preseason game against the Rangers on Thursday night. Guy, I would say, Patrick Brown's not going to do it. I don't
Yeah.
think AJ Greer's in there. I think he's got bumped.
Wow.
Um, and then on defense, Lowry's been great, but it's like unless you can trade one of Grizzlick or Forbert, where do you put him? Right? I mean, because he's gonna be the extra guy, and you don't want a kid that young to just sit up in the press box. You want him playing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
the
like,
dilemma.
yeah, and like there's no rush, right? And so like if you
Exactly.
can if you can send him down, like the most important thing for him is to get the reps. Like you don't want
Exactly.
him sitting around on level 9, and that's
No.
not going to do anybody any good.
Yeah.
It's like one of those situations where you send him down and just let him know that, like, hey, put yourself in a position to be first in line if something
Uh-huh.
happens up here. And
And
that's
it will.
the best
Yeah.
possible situation for him,
Right.
I think. So it's just one of those things where if you're in that stage of development where the reps are so
Mhm.
important, and that's where exactly where he is, that he needs that.
Yeah, and I mean, it will. I mean, there'll be injuries. There'll be guys that slump. I mean,
Mhm.
there's going to be an opportunity there. So yeah, I'm with you. Just put him there. Keep playing. Keep progressing. We'll see what happens. All right, let's expand, and we'll include the Bruins in this too. But let's expand into the Eastern Conference right now, because I think we're finally going to see some changing of the guard in the lower tier, the wild cards, maybe the third team in each division. I think we're going to see some flip flopping there. Who are some teams that weren't in the playoffs last year and years prior that you see making the jump this year?
I mean, like the one that everybody's talking about this summer is the Buffalo Sabres, and the Sabres, I think, are past the point where they're underrated. They might be overrated at this
Yeah.
point, based off of like how many people think that they're going to make the jump. I'm one of them. I don't think that they're going to make like a massive jump. I don't think they're going to win the Atlantic or anything like that. They probably won't be in the top 3. They may finish as the 3rd spot in the Atlantic, but like that team's ready to make the jump. I think they should make the playoffs this year. I think you could say the same thing with like the Ottawa Senators, but like, somebody's got to fall out of position from the top 4 too. And so
Right.
the Atlantic is still good at the top, whether you're talking about the Bruins. I know the Bruins are taking a step backwards, but I think a lot of people are writing their death certificate a little bit too early here.
Yeah.
They're still a good team, and especially on the back end. The Leafs
Yeah.
are really good. I think that they're probably going to win the Atlantic this year, the Leafs.
Mhm.
Um, Tampa's an interesting case because Tampa I could see taking a step back. They took a step back last year, and now they're starting the season without Vasi. Like
Yeah.
they lost Killorn.
I'm with
They've
you.
been losing a lot of these key pieces, and
Mhm.
I'm not been super impressed by what they've done to kind of bridge the gap and transition. So like I could see Tampa taking a step back and Buffalo moving forward. Florida is another interesting case because they're starting the season without their top two defensemen, and that's a pretty bad defensive team to begin with.
Right.
So like I don't know. The Atlantic is really interesting, but if I'm picking a team to move up, it's got to be Buffalo, and then probably behind them is Ottawa.
Blake?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump back to the Bruins a little bit. People on Twitter kind of just going crazy over the whole Fabian Lysell thing. He got sent down pretty early on, but like people are saying he's a bust and he's 20 years old. You can't really be saying that right now. What's your whole take on that situation?
I feel like he's a victim. I feel like to an extent, David Pastrnak has kind of victimized Fabian Lysell, where Pastrnak came in and immediately sort of had that impact that I think people were expecting Lysell to have. And it might be a little bit disappointing that he hasn't been further along, especially when we kind of saw some flashes a year or two ago. Is it a disappointment? Yeah, you can say that, but calling him a bust is unfair. He's still 20 years
Yeah.
old. I think he's got a lot of runway still in front of him, but you do want to see him continue that momentum and not kind of be dragged down by maybe how much it's stalled.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm with you on that too. I mean, look, I talk to scouts a lot up in the press box there, and there's a general consensus that, the word I get all the time, and I think it's a little harsh, but I'm just being honest with you, is soft. Um, but he's 20, like Blake just said, and I'm with you guys. Like, okay, there's a lot of players that come in that are highly skilled and soft when they start off. That's what experience will do. It will toughen them up and season them. So I'm with you. I don't think they should give up on him yet. But the one thing I think is interesting, right, is how will the progression of some of these other younger guys that have suddenly burst onto the scene, and I know they're centers mostly in defense, but where does it put them in terms of their prospect depth chart? And so this is going to be a huge, I'd say, first 2 months for him in Providence.
Mhm.
He needs to just come out, make a statement, get out there and say, look, you guys made a mistake. I belong up there. And maybe they'll be able to accommodate him. Maybe they won't. But for his confidence, as you're saying, Pete, I'm with you on that. Hey, getting back to the Eastern Conference, I agree with you completely on Buffalo. I mean, it's now or never for them. The team I look at right now, and I still think they got to move up their sleeve, is the Detroit Red Wings. You look at obviously what Stevie Y did in Tampa to get them to the point before he left, where they became a contender, and what he's already doing in Detroit there. I think the big question mark to me is the goaltending. So I'm interested to see if they address that in season going forward. Does he give the guys he has another chance for the rest of the season? We'll see. But I think they're an interesting team there, and they've got some kids coming too that,
Mhm.
we're not hearing about them right now, but we might later in the season if they're pushing for a playoff run. So that's an interesting team to me. And yeah, I think the Senators, I don't want to put them in that now or never that I just put the Buffalo Sabres in.
I don't think it's now or never for the Sabres, by the way. I
Okay.
think that they gotta at least kind of try to build on what they did last year. But you look at their core, it's still so young. Like
Yeah.
it's one of those situations where you would love to see them do it this year because the core is so young and they're not paying guys as much as they will starting next year.
Mhm.
But like they've got a long, long runway with the core
Yeah.
that they have right now.
I I just wonder, like, that fan base though. I mean,
They're hungry for sure.
yeah,
Like they
and if the Bills choke, I mean,
yeah.
there's gonna be a lot of pissed off people up there.
I said something. So I saw somebody say something earlier this offseason about like the Sabres need to make the playoffs this year. And I was kind of surprised by that being like, do they though? Like, do they need to make it? The Atlantic is still pretty good. They're still like you could still have a good season and miss the playoffs. I think
Right.
if you're Buffalo, but the pretty much like 99% of fans from Buffalo were like, yes, like from an
Yeah.
emotional standpoint, we need to make the playoffs.
Right.
We need something. Yeah.
Exactly. So from a hockey management point, it's okay if you just
Right.
miss. They
Yeah.
can't, but they can't be down in that. They need to be in like that 8 to 11 area in terms of ratings of teams in the right in the
Yeah.
conference. They have to be somewhere there. So, but Ottawa, like that's an interesting team, man, right? Because it was like there were such high hopes going into last season, and then the proverbial shit just hit the fan in so many ways.
Yeah.
What's your take on where they go from here? New ownership. Is Pierre Dorion safe? Now they bring in Steve Stales. What's your take on the situation in Ottawa there?
I mean, I definitely don't think Dorian should be safe. I wasn't as high on Ottawa last year as a lot of people were after their. I thought they had a really, uh, a solid offseason. Like I liked some of the things that they did, but at the end of the day, I looked at their goaltending. I was not sold on Cam Talbot being the guy, and obviously he didn't have a good year, and now that situation's changed. They seem to me like a team that absolutely needs to make significant progress this year to justify
Yeah.
sort of some of the moves that they've made and some of the young guys that are there. Like they need to start putting some notches in their belt as a team that's moving forward and towards something. Otherwise, I think that, like I said, the front office kind of that direction kind of changes for me.
Yeah, and I mean, anytime you kind of expect it, right? When you get a new owner, the guy wants his own guys in there, but he didn't put him directly in Dorian's seat, so
Mhm.
he's going to see how it works there. I look too at their defense will be interesting to me, right? They've got some good young defensemen. A lot of people were trashing that extension they gave Sanderson. I have no issues with it. What about you?
No, I don't have much of an issue with it. It's a lot of money now, but again, cap goes up. He develops into a little bit better of a player. He's still 21 years old.
Yeah.
That's a situation that could end up looking pretty solid in a few years. So don't hate it. To me, like I agree with you. Their back end is sort of a pivotal factor as to how well they do. Going back to the team that you just talked about, the Red Wings, I don't think they're
Mhm.
good enough on the back end and in net.
Okay.
And they're one of those teams that uh, I think is still at least a year or two away from being really, really pushing for relevance,
Mhm.
especially because they're freeing up some dead money after this year. I think it's like almost $4 million coming off a dead cap for Stevie Y starting next summer. So
Right.
that's when the clock really starts ticking for Stevie Y and sort of that rebuild that's seemingly been going on for quite a long time in Detroit.
Blake, who's your breakthrough team you're looking at?
I like the Sabres. I think they're going to have a good season. I think they're going to finish ahead of the Bruins in the Atlantic.
Whoa.
Yes.
Wow.
Hmm.
I don't hate that take. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that, like I said, somebody's got to fall off. And if the Sabres finish as like the third team in the Atlantic, second or third team in the Atlantic, Bruins are probably behind them.
The
Bruins a
Atlantic's
wild
up
card
in
though,
the air
Blake?
this year. It's going to be a weird division this
Mhm.
year.
Do you have the Bruins still making the playoffs as a wild
Yes,
card?
I have them as a wild card spot.
Yeah. It's funny, I was talking to Marchand, kind of just shooting the breeze, and he's trying to say, "Oh, hey, no, look what Florida did last year."
Yeah.
And I'm like, I guess I'm saying it now, Marshy. Sorry, but I mean, he's got a point. I mean, and you said it to start this off, Pete. Teams are sleeping on him a bit, and maybe it's a blessing in disguise if they fall
Mhm.
into that wild card slot, right? I mean, because a lot of people looked at Florida. They won the Presidents the year before, and yeah, they thought they were going to drop, but I don't think they thought they'd drop that much. And then they come in and they've got nothing to lose, and they pull off one of the biggest upsets in NHL history, And so the Bruins could be a scary team as a wild
Mm.
card. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world if Buffalo leapfrogs them.
No, I don't think so either. And maybe it lights a fire under their ass. Maybe they kind of have
Yeah.
a chip on their shoulder after last year. I mean, you look at what's happened to the President's Trophy winners, like the season after they win. It's there's a
Just give
trend
it,
there.
you guys keep this. We don't want it. You keep
Yeah, right. Back to Buffalo. I think that I don't know if you guys are betting guys, but like I think my favorite bet, this favorite futures bet right now is Devin Levi to win the Calder at plus 2,000. Like I could easily see him being a Calder front runner if he's great at Northeastern, was like the best goalie in college hockey for a couple of years. Came in last year at the tail end of last year for Buffalo, looked good and from what we saw from him. Obviously, goaltending is a little unpredictable, especially when you're a younger guy. But the defense in front of him isn't amazing. But I think that he's a guy that could help if they get into the playoffs and they say they get into the top three in the Atlantic. He's probably going to be a big reason why, and that's going to
Yeah,
translate to Calder votes. So
and he's a Jedi too.
that's right. Yeah,
I love that.
I love that guy. He's great.
Yeah, I really am pulling for him. I mean, the Calder's definitely going to Bedard probably unless he gets hurt. But I want to see him up there right now. Like, and it would be great too to see the Sabres make the playoffs and him be the reason why. Like when a young, there's nothing like a young goalie coming in like that to me. I think it's one of the coolest stories that can happen in hockey when a young kid comes in between the pipes and pulls a team back to respectability. So we'll see what happens. Hey, let's go out west. Same idea. Teams you think that are going to rise up and teams that could drop off the top of your head there, Pete.
I don't know if it technically counts as rising up, but like I think that the team that I'm looking at next year to be like a legitimate Stanley Cup favorite coming out of the West is the Dallas Stars. Like I really like Dallas. I really like the mix that they have with older guys, veterans, and young guys coming up. And they have the goaltending. Jake Ottinger's a beast. And that the Matt Duchene ad, you say whatever you want about Matt Duchene based off of who he was on his last contract, but the deal that they got him for in a prove it year, he needs to make his money again next summer. And for that team to bring in a guy like Matt Duchene on the contract that he's in to help spread their offense out a little bit, because that was their big problem for me last year, was that their offense basically came from one line and it drove most of their offense. Yeah. And that top line is one of the best top lines in hockey, but it can't be your only productive line. We've seen it so many times with the Bruins the years past.
You have 2019 Bruins, right?
Yeah, exactly. So adding him, I think that team is poised to do some really good things.
Yeah.
If they can get by defensively, because they didn't do much to improve defensively last year.
And, I like what you say about Duchene too. And it's one of those things that bugs me a lot. And look, I've been guilty of it in the past. We all are sometimes, but just judging a guy based on the numbers on his contract and then the value of his contract. People change, man. I mean, people go through a lot in careers, and you got to think. I mean, I know that there were some stories about him in the past with Duchene, and was he a good dressing room guy? The guy's matured. I mean, I know guys that have played with him, and they speak highly of him. I mean, people can change, and it's hard when you can see a guy just get typecasted, and it just sticks with him. That label sticks with him. So I do hope he kind of proves himself in Dallas there. And I'm with you. That's a team there too. Another prove it guy. I'll jump over to another contender here, is Ryan Johansson in Colorado. I think that was a very interesting pickup. He is obviously not the Ryan Johansson he was 5 years ago or even 3. But this guy, I think, could, if they place him right in the lineup and they don't put too much depending on him, he could help them a lot.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where, like, I'm not the biggest Ryan Johansson guy, but like in that situation for that team makes a lot of sense. And it's something that they've kind of been looking for. I think it's one of those situations, him and Jonathan Drouin. Like Jonathan Drouin needs a nice fresh little start.
Yeah.
And Colorado's a good spot for it. Let me tell you what. And so both of those guys could see their careers revitalized a little bit, or at least like just be a productive player on a good team. Like that's really all they need to be. And they don't have a ton of pressure on them. It's just, slot in, do your job, and collect your money and contribute to a winning team. And they've got a good opportunity to do that.
Blake, you have a team that you think's jumping up in the West?
I think the Oilers are going to have a good year.
Well, yeah, they're a contender. Yeah. I'm talking about bottom side that didn't make the playoffs. Is there a team that you think could make the leap there? So I don't think there's as many teams that could jump in the East as there is in the West. Like
he said before, the Stars are going to be a good team to go against. I don't think there's any teams that were really on the bottom last year that are going to kind of rise up.
I disagree with that. I will say, I think the Calgary Flames could bounce back this year.
Bingo.
And I think that's a lot of stuff went wrong for that team last year, and the vibes were very bad in Calgary last year, as evidenced by the fact that everybody seemingly wanted out and didn't want to stick around. I think that I could see that shifting a little bit and them having a good bounce back year, especially if Jacob Markstrom is solid in net.
I'm with you on that. And I think, look, Craig Conroy brings a fresh approach from the top there, and it can trickle on down. They got a new coach. I'm not taking away anything that Daryl Sutter has done in the past. He's had his success. Obviously, he brought the LA Kings some prominence there, and and put them on the map finally in terms of being a Stanley Cup champion. But like his time had passed him, and that showed tremendously last year. So I think that new approach, a younger guy running the bench, and I think Huberdeau is going to have a monster season, guys. I really do. I think he bounces back in a big way in this new setting, this new atmosphere. So I'm with you there. I think another team. Now, this is a team, guys, I'm going to tell you that I'm watching. I don't necessarily think I don't think they're anywhere close to the playoffs, but I think they're one of those teams, especially for you bettors out there. Be careful. Maybe not now, but second half of the season, when teams that are contending for those final playoff spots have to play them, I think the Anaheim Ducks are going to be a pain in the ass. I just think they're going to be that gritty, annoying team. They're going to lull you to sleep. I know Greg Cronin well. I've known him all my life. I know the way he coaches. I know the person he is. He's going to bring a different mentality to that team. Like I said, they're going to
be tough
for the playoffs, but they're going to be tough to play against once they start to really get the rhythm of his system. So I would watch them. And the other team I'm looking at guys, I don't see many teams that weren't in the playoffs last year, except for Calgary, making that jump. What I do see is teams like Anaheim that maybe climb up the standings a little more. And you guys may laugh. I think the Coyotes are going to improve.
I was going to say, I thought you were going to say the Coyotes when you were talking about Anaheim.
Okay.
I think that the Coyotes are a team that, I don't think they probably don't make the playoffs, but I think they end up closer than a lot of people expect.
Right.
And the jump is going to be pretty significant, if only for the fact that like last year's roster was kind of a joke. This year's roster is not a joke. It's an NHL caliber roster. Mm-hmm. They added a lot of respectable guys this offseason, a lot of guys who have a lot to prove. Yep. And I think that in combination with the fact that they have some really good young players, and we saw what Logan Cooley can do in this camp, like that team, I think, is going to make a statement that they're no longer a joke. And if anything, that's where they need to start, because they've been a joke for a little bit. And I don't think that that's going to be the case this year. And I don't necessarily share your optimism in the Anaheim Ducks, but I think the Arizona Coyotes are going to be one of those teams that can play spoiler down the stretch.
And I want to take a game in there. I'm sorry. I think if they are playing well, it's and fun. They get that place buzzing, that's going to be a rocking atmosphere, because they're just right on top of you. Mm-hmm. But look, we said off air we wanted to talk about some breakout players or some younger players besides Connor Bedard that could make an impact, and you just touched on one there. What's your thoughts on Logan Cooley?
He rocks. He's an unbelievable player. His skill set is insane. Yeah. Love that kid. Very excited that he's should have a pretty significant impact for that team this year. Another guy, right behind Bedard, but Adam Fantilli, man, I think he's gonna be exactly what Columbus has been looking for in terms of the franchise center. They've needed one for a while, and to me, I know I talked about Devin Levi as a Calder. Another guy who's plus 2,000 right now is Adam Fantilli, and I kind of look at him in a similar light to Matty Beniers as last year, where Seattle didn't have much down the middle, so they needed Beniers to come in immediately and help them in that top six. I could see the same thing happening to Fantilli, where he just stacks points playing alongside some really good players and puts himself in good position to win the Calder. Like, I think Fantilli's great. And another guy who's been unbelievable in camp and in preseason is Zach Benson in Buffalo. Like, he is creating a really tough decision for the Sabres and where they slot him in. And if he plays on that top line next to Tage Thompson, good Lord, like that kid rocks. Like, he's a hard-nosed player, really skilled, will go to the dirty areas. Could see Zach Benson having a really big year.
Yep, I'm with you on all of those. All right, we're going to close it out. Blake, you wanted to ask about a guy that's on the free agent block that I think within the next week or two we're going to hear a lot about.
Mm-hmm. Patty Kane. Where do you think he goes, Pete?
Buffalo would be interesting, just being it's his hometown, and they've got that flexibility. They could find a spot for him. Detroit, is another one. I know that there's
I
been
was just
some
gonna say, yep,
some links there with DeBrincat and
yep.
wanting to play with him. But another spot that I look at, it's not super exciting, but the Chicago Blackhawks. Like, does he go back to Chicago,
Mm.
especially with, that team kind of having somewhat of a direction now, and then getting to play with Bedard, like, could be interesting there.
Yeah, yeah. I would look. One team I've heard maybe is the Panthers too, that could jump in there on him, and then maybe the Kings as well. But I would love the Chicago
Kings
thing.
the Kings would make a lot of sense.
I would
Yeah,
love if he went back to Chicago. That'd be
it would
awesome.
be great. Put
It would
him on the
be,
line with Bedard.
yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be the most exciting, and it would have to be like for a long-term vision because obviously they're not going to compete this year.
Right.
But man, the Kings
It
is
depends
really
on what he wants, right? Does he
Right,
want? Is he in it for another cup, or is he in it just to play for love of the game?
right.
That's what it depends on. So
Or like just a little bit of long-term security. Like if the Blackhawks want to sign him to a little bit of a longer deal to kind of keep him in the fold.
yeah,
Yeah,
because he's
Bedard
probably
and
looking at a
whatnot.
1-year deal everywhere else, right?
pretty much. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
assume so.
So, well, anyhow, man, Pete, great having you on. We appreciate it, and we'll have to get you on again down the line. And I hope to see you around the rink.
Yeah, of course you will. You will.
All
I'll
right.
be there. So
Pete
thanks for having me on.
Blackburn, Blake Thorne, and myself here on Murphy's Hockey Law. We'll talk to you next week.